Hey guys, bit of a longer video for you today. This is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to create for the sole purpose of demonstrating how I ensure that my tracks are top quality, ready to be submitted to any music library, and stand the best chance of getting sales. What I'm going to show you today is basically how I transformed someone else's track into something that I would feel totally comfortable submitting to Motion Array or Audiojungle, for example. And I'm going to show you how I did it by simply adding and changing a few very small but very important details. So today's track was provided by my friend Mike, who supports this channel on Patreon. All my patrons are eligible to have their tracks remixed, and of course they can keep the stems that I create and they can do whatever they want with them. So if you'd like your track remixed, please feel free to join the Patreon team. I'd be happy to do a remix for you. The lowest tier starts at $3 a month, and that comes with all sorts of other great benefits. So make sure to click the link below in the description and check out some of the other content that I have there as well. So if you want to skip ahead, I put the markers in this video so you can go jump ahead and look at the final results if you like. However, if you are having trouble getting your tracks accepted by Motion Array or Audiojungle, for example, I'd highly suggest watching the whole video because I think there's a lot of cool information in there that I'm hoping that everyone will find really useful. So one last thing before we jump in, make sure to join the Production Music Academy. It's totally free to enroll, and you'll be the first to be notified about all upcoming course deals. And guess what? The next course is going to be on hip hop, and I'm really excited about that. So I'll be sure to keep you in the loop on that one. Okay, let's jump in. Let's listen to the first 8 bars of Mike's master that he sent me originally. Okay, so a few problems that I hear right off the bat. Let's take it instrument by instrument. The idea is there, the vibe is there, but I think the track just needs a little bit of finessing, a little bit of fleshing out for it to kind of come to life a little bit. So let's start with a kick. Okay, listening to the kick stem here. To be honest, I probably would have opted for a bit more consistency with your kick sample rather than, it feels like a bit strange to me to have 2 very different kick samples in the pattern. I wouldn't say there's like a rule about that in particular, but what I've done is I've added my own kick sample in just to kind of give it like a little bit more impact, a little bit more punch. On its own, that sample sounds like this. And I just threw in this sample across the whole track, just to kind of fill out where your kicks were originally. Okay, the snare that Mike used on its own sounded like this. Nothing wrong with that, just it kind of sounds like a little bit weak. So again, just using the same approach, I just grabbed a rim hit sample to kind of thicken this out a little bit. And every 8 bars I added in a punchy snare, just kind of give it a little bit more variety. Okay, nothing wrong with the kick and snare and drum pattern altogether. Let's play Mike's entire drum kit just for a second here. And I'll include the kick and the snare samples that I added as well. Yeah, this is great. This is going to work, and it has a nice kind of groove to it. It just feels a little bit empty. So one way that I kind of solved that problem is just by adding like some percussion loops. And I found a really nice percussive like textural loop here that I threw in. It sounds like this on its own. So you got a bit of shaker in there. I also found this other drum loop that I thought was kind of cool. So it's got a bit of like lo-fi vinyl crackle as well as like a really nice sounding organic snare. And then listening to Mike's hats on their own. They're very stiff, and I think they needed like a little bit more flair. It really helps to add some like swing into the rhythm with the hats. So I ended up recording a new pattern that's like quite a bit more dynamic and swung, and found that it actually fits quite nicely with the hats that were already in the track. So listening to the hats that I recorded. And of course you can hear also that I added that open hi-hat, which adds a nice little bit of flavor to it. So both hats at the same time. Actually kind of sounds nice. So let's listen to everything together along with the textural loops that I added as well. So as you can hear, it just adds a lot of depth. There's a really nice groove to it now. Let's just A-B it. So we'll listen to the beat as it is now with all the added elements. And this is what it was originally. So just adding a few little things in there really, made a huge difference, as you can hear. Okay, let's take a listen to the bass that Mike recorded with these drums. We got to be really careful with our bass, especially with hip hop, just because it lives so, the kick and the bass have just such a central role in our mix. So we really got to craft our bass line to match the drum groove properly. One thing I would suggest, if you're just, having trouble coming up with a good bass groove, is just to follow the kick pattern for one thing, but just kind of get creative with it and try to avoid just, simply, just playing the tonic of the chords. So if you do play the bass, then I totally recommend, actually recording with a real bass. I love to use a real bass when I create hip hop. Obviously, I know that not everyone out there is a guitar player or a bass player. One library that I really like that I've mentioned before is the Scarby J Rickenbacker bass. It has a really nice punchy tone, and it's sort of a tone that I try to emulate when I record my real bass as well. Another thing that I noticed with Mike's bass here, it's just ever so slightly out of tune with the piano chords. I'm going to play these sampled chopped chords here just so you can see what I mean. So it actually sounds kind of cool when it's a little bit out of tune, but I think that it's a little bit distracting in this case. So I decided to scrap Mike's bass altogether, and I'm going to mute this, and I just recorded a new one, and this is what it sounds like. So it kind of grooves with the kick a little bit more, and I'll play it with the piano chords as well. So as you can hear, that bass is really subby, and I'm pushing it through a bit of compression as well. You'll also notice that the regions are all chopped up here, and that's because I get really picky about the timing of the bass transients, and I really want to just lock it in, to the point of perfection with the kick, so that it just feels really, really tight. So I actually edited pretty much almost all of these notes so that they were lined up with the grid and or the kick. So once we get 8 bars in here, we have this really nice piano melody that Mike introduces right here, and it sounds like this. I love it. I think it just sounded a little bit dry and a little bit one-dimensional on its own. So I added a few more layers to that melody. And you'll see below here that I added an omnisphere patch, which sounds like this. And that's the analog tremolo piano patch, which sounds really nice from the omnisphere. And I also added a patch from Straylight Piano, which I think is called Throwback Piano. So that's super ambient, as you can hear. So altogether, they sound like this now. I also bust these 3 patches into a group, and I put them through a bit of RC20 as well. So there's just a bit of wobble, which adds a really nice kind of like lo-fi touch to it, as well as just a little bit of noise and a bit of distortion as well. So once we get 16 bars in, then Mike introduces these horns, this horn line, and I'll play the full mix, his master, pretty low in the mix, but just so you can hear it in the mix. So those horns on their own sound like this. So I like the idea of these horn stabs, and I love adding horns into hip hop. But I think they kind of ended up suffering from the same problem as the melody. It just sounds a little bit weak on its own. Instead of using this melody, what I did to try to capture the same vibe is I opted to just use some stabs that I pulled from Splice, and then I edited those to the beat. So I'm going to leave Mike's horns out of the mix here, and the ones that I ended up using sound like this after I chop them up. Okay, so that's our little horn loop. And I think that those are going to work nicely because they're not going to interfere with the other melodic stuff that we have going on in the track at the same time. Speaking of which, there's a secondary melody that comes in right here. And Mike used a harp for this melody, and I really like this melody too. Really simple. So same idea, I just wanted to flesh it out a little bit more, so I pulled up one of my Arturia synths, used the Selena for this one, and I kind of just doubled up that melody. So again, one of the problems that I had with Mike's horn line is that it kind of interfered with this melody a little bit. They just felt a little bit disconnected. So if I play his horns against his melody over here, it sounds like this. They just don't feel like they're jiving together. And I think what ended up happening here with the horns that I added is they just kind of, they kind of dance with that, this top line melody right here in a way that just feels a little bit more comfortable to me. And a similar problem that I encountered with some conflicting melodic ideas is Mike introduced this cool string pattern at the back end of the track here, and it sounds like this. Similar melody to his original horn line. And I didn't want to scrap these strings altogether, so what I did was basically just kind of turn it into a more textural ambient instrument. And so what I did is I just added the Echo Boy Jr. to it, put like a lot of delay on it, and a ping pong delay with quite a bit of feedback, and it sounds like this now. And I also fed that through quite a bit of reverb. And the effect that it had with the new horns that I added is actually kind of cool. It kind of complements them in a really nice way. But they're quite low in the mix just because I feel like it's a little bit distracting to have it too high. But they're kind of, they're ducked underneath the horns in a way that I thought kind of sounded cool. So while we're on the topic of strings, I do love adding strings to hip hop. I love adding cinematic elements to my hip hop. And one thing that I wanted to explore with strings was adding a kind of like longer, like flotando string patch, just kind of like hanging above this like back end section. So I just added it to the last 8 bars of the track, and it sounds like this on its own. So for that, I just used Spitfire's, one of Spitfire's string libraries, and I put it through a ton of reverb. Use the Aperture strings, and it's the flotando patch. So our nice, floaty strings in the mix with our sampled chords, and the beat sounds like this. And those floaty strings just kind of elevate the energy of the track a little bit more in the, the most important section, which is just this very final 8 bars. So let's go back to Mike's master here and just listen again to what he's got going on during this second chorus here. Okay, so all the right elements are there. I love that you used some filter automation coming into that section, and there's some vocal chops in there which sound really cool. I felt intuitively, the first time I listened to it, that there's just a lot of room for detail. Now, you guys have heard me talk a lot about splice, and one of the reasons I think it's a great resource for hip hop is that you can take all these like little one shots and you can really mess with them and kind of create your own vibe. Now, in this case, what I did was I just basically pulled a bunch of vocal shots that I'd already downloaded that were all in the key of D minor, so it suited the track really nicely. And I just started chopping away and creating something kind of like it's a rhythm for all of these samples to kind of groove with the song. So I used about 7 different splice samples here just to create something interesting. And I'll play here what I ended up chopping up against just the original sampled chords, so you get a good idea of what these sound like on their own. Now, if you look at the track overall, it's also important to note that I didn't just loop the vocal chops in any particular way. They change; they're always morphing, and I kind of created new patterns as the song went on, just to keep things interesting. Hip hop already exists in that kind of like very looped vibe, so it's really important to add variety. So as you can see, what I have highlighted here, all this stuff down here, there's a lot of variation in the chops. And as I'm sure you can hear, that it has its own distinct melody. So another thing to keep in mind is, I wanted to stay true to Mike's beautiful piano melody when I was adding all of these vocal chops, because as you can hear, these vocal chops have a distinct melody of their own. And I think I really kept Mike's piano melody here in mind when I was chopping up these samples, and I chopped them up in a way where they kind of like dance with the piano melody in a way that's just kind of like they push and pull in a really interesting fashion. So just listening to those together. So again, they're two separate, entities, but they kind of coexist in a way, and I think that is just something that you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with anything that's melodic. Okay, taking a quick listen to what is essentially the backbone of the entire track is these sampled, chopped piano chords that Mike had. So I like the vibe and I like the chords. They sound nice, but again, it just kind of came back to it not sounding dead, but they needed a little bit more detail. It needed a little bit of layering, in my opinion. So what I did basically was just add a few layers to that. Starting with Arturia's Jupiter synth, I added this. It's kind of like a nice, soft pad sound. I also added 2 Mellotron patches, which sound really cool, and those are both Arturia synths as well. And then this one. And I think while I'm thinking about it right now, I might actually just pan these left and right just a little bit. Let's give it a little bit more width. And listening to them all together, sounds like this. Which ultimately is just a little bit more interesting than where we started, which was here. So other than that, I didn't add a whole lot more to this track. I brought in a tambourine loop just to kind of elevate the back end of these choruses. I also added a few cymbal swells just to kind of accent, well, first of all, this intro, and then coming out of the first chorus and then into the back end of the final chorus. So Mike had a bunch of, small details, all of which I liked, little one-shot vocals and stuff like that. He had some like vinyl scratch audio in here, which sounds cool. Some shaker, some reverse piano, all of which, added a lot to the track, and I didn't remove any of that. So what I'm going to do right now is just A/B the first half of the song here. I'm going to listen to Mike's master to start with, and then I'm going to play my master. Again, this is not to trash Mike's work at all. Like, I really like the track, and what I want to do is just illustrate, how important all these little details are, and how much of a difference they can make. So let's just highlight the first half of our track here, and I'm just going to play Mike's master. Okay, great. And here's where we are now. Okay, thanks so much for watching, guys, and a huge shout out and thank you to Mike for providing these stems for today's video. As always, if you have any questions or thoughts, hit me up in the comments, and I hope you're all doing well. Take care, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.